This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt. So maybe to start, you can tell us your story, because I know very little about you, and I would love to know who you are and how did you start on this journey?
So I am I have a degree in linguistics and gender and women's studies from UC Berkeley. And then I also have a master's from San Jose State that's in speech language pathology. And have been working in the field since I graduated. And so I'm working around people who often they've had an injury or they've had some kind of an illness that left them with some sort of speech language cognitive disability. And so how did I get into this was the fact that when I was at Berkeley, sorry, I'm a little bit distracted right now because I'm thinking that I should switch the mic to the webcam mic. I just noticed it's the internal mic. I'm worried it's not going to be a good quality.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
If I switch that and then start over.
Sure. Yeah.
Just thinking about that. Does this sound better at all?
It sounds a little more muffled, but it doesn't sound as roomy as the other one does. So
yeah.
So that's fine. Totally fine.
Okay, so I'll start over. So a little bit about me is that I have a bachelor's in gender and women's studies and linguistics. And when I was in university at the University of California, Berkeley, which is a very leftist university, and it happens to be where Judith Butler teaches. So the gender women's studies department there is very steeped in her work, even though she's not in that department. She's in a different department, which I always thought was a bit odd. But she's in comparative literature, I think, and rhetoric. And so when I was there, I was exposed to those ideas, and I and other people in my immediate circle adopted a trans identity by, we all sat around and remembered our past and knit together a narrative of how we were always like this, and we always knew, and there were signs, and now here we are. And then I also met somebody there shortly after that, who I then exposed to the ideas in turn, and then she adopted them, and she ended up going down the path of testosterone and mastectomy. So seeing that was quite formative. I guess I could say it was a bit horrifying, the immediate aftermath of that, and realizing like, oh, it's not just an idea that we're toying around with. Like this is your life now. You just cut a piece of yourself off. Now you have tubes coming out of your chest. But I guess we're all gonna act like this is fine. This is a normal thing.
You're so brave. She's so brave for this.
So brave.
Was she your only friend who went through that surgery?
No, but she's the one that I was closest to in the process of it. But she's not the only person that I had another friend through a club I was involved in, which was the atheist club that they had. And she also went down that path and had the top surgery and took the drugs, and she went from being this like fresh face. I met her right when she came up. I think she emailed me shortly before she got to Cal, because she was looking forward to joining the Atheist Club, and so I was a couple of years ahead of her, and yeah, she just the profound change from like this fresh-faced 18-year-old to like this pretty, like, she just kind of, her whole vibe changed. Like the light went out. She just was just, in my opinion, a bit miserable. But and then there were other people around us in our orbit who were doing the same thing, and we were all thinking about it, if not actually doing it. I spent a long time thinking, like, is this the path for me? Is this going to be the magical solution to my emotional difficulties and my social anxiety? And I had another partner who was a man who identified as a woman, and he kind of encouraged me to think, like, well, if I should be prioritizing it too, because look how much it helped this other person. We were in a polycule, which is like a polyamorous like relationship. So we were all dating each other, and yeah. So there was just this idea that this would be the magical solution. But by that point in my life, I'd had my wisdom teeth out, and I had an appendectomy, and I also had a surgery for another condition called Eagle syndrome, which involved a tonsillectomy.
Mm.
And every single time, what they told me would be the likely recovery period had been off by like a factor of 10. So it took me a ridiculously long time to heal from the appendectomy. The actual incisions didn't even like close until a solid 2 months after. And they told me I'd be back to normal activities in 4 days. And I could barely move around for weeks. Wow. It was pretty miserable. And so I don't know if it's something that's just different about me, but I was like, this is a lot of surface area. Those cuts were tiny. This is the entire chest. It would be a huge undertaking to try to do that. So, but I also was like thinking that she hadn't had hers yet. And I was like, she's going to have hers. So maybe I'll see how it goes for her. I'll just see if the other penguin can jump in off the ice floe, and if the orc is there and she gets eaten, then I just won't. It's a very, very selfish thing, but I was 22 at the time. So I have to live with the fact that that's who I was, and that was my reasoning, but that is what the reasoning was. And it's so she did, and I ended up, that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin of like, am I gonna go undergo this massive undertaking to change my appearance? And I decided no. And the way she told it at the time, she was quite happy with the decision. The incisions themselves, they didn't really approximate well, so they kind of like, if this was the incision line, they kind of sagged open pretty quickly, and they never fully filled in, so they were always a little bit like discolored, like so it kind of looked like two big smiles like underneath, and she had her nipples removed and repositioned, and so those looked a little odd. And
And so how many years ago was this for you?
About 15. So this was starting in around 2009, and then continuing till, I got to graduate school. I was still identifying that way, but I decided against surgery. I decided against testosterone also because like my brother had really horrific cystic acne. I've never seen it that bad on anyone else when he was an adolescent. And I had very mild cystic acne. And so I was like, it's probably because of the hormones. So if I start injecting myself with testosterone, that's probably going to be really bad. And I don't want to go through that. In both cases, it was because I had a grounded understanding that like my skin had its own unique medical circumstance, and these interventions might not go the way that they think they're going to go. And I might really not like that outcome.
Sure.
Yeah.
That was pretty early in the push, though. It seems like these were pioneers doing this. This was long before it became what it is today.
Yeah, I decided that I was a trans man or a trans masculine person shortly before Jennings actually got the puberty blocker implant, because he was born in 2000, and so they put the implant in him in 2011. My girlfriend got the mastectomy in 2012, and that's the year I went to graduate school. and also discovered the concept of transmasculine voice disorder. So the voice disorder that some women that take testosterone get. And then over the next couple of years, I just gradually kind of became more interested in my profession, less preoccupied with my appearance. It was a totally different social scene, so there wasn't the same reinforcement socially for this mindset. And most of them had never even come across the concept before, so they were kind of interested in hearing about it. But like once they heard about it one time, they were kind of bored of it. And it was interesting to see that, like, okay, so you guys have zero interest in this hobby of mine, but you're still willing to interact with me and be friends and be supportive. So it was kind of like a paradigm shifting for me that, like, I don't need to be doing this in order to have a social group that's positive.
Yeah.
Whereas before I'd kind of felt like, well, my social issues up till then were a result of not having come out. And now that I've come out, everybody around me needs to either be in the group or be supporting it, or else they're going to be mean to me. And it's just, I had a specific idea, but that's how cults work, is that they kind of can target people who are looking for that sort of community and don't know how to find it directly, and haven't, for whatever reason, found it directly. And so it can be hard to leave. And I think that if I hadn't left that environment in order to continue my schooling, I don't know what would have happened. My girlfriend, from what I can see, ex-girlfriend now, she appears to still be very much in it. And maybe that's because she radically changed her appearance more. And maybe it's because she was in graduate school when this happened, so she didn't have a reason to leave it later. And then kind of quickly went. I think she got a job in a trans-centered organization, and that she's, from last I heard, is still at. So,
well, I would take issue with the term pioneer, Chris, because this has been going on for, well, I mean, people have been identifying in other sexes for thousands of years, so that's not really a new phenomena.
Pre-social contagion.
I think the interesting thing is that in 1987, when I first went to college, I took a human sexuality class, and we studied transsexuals and people who were going through gender reassignment surgeries. And the process that you had to go through in 1987 is vastly different from the process that people are going through now. Back then, you had to go through a year of psychotherapy, at least. You had to live for 1 year in that other gender before you were given any puberty blockers, before you were given any hormonal therapy at all, before you would even be considered to do anything surgical. So I think that there were some gatekeepers that were in place back then that have completely disappeared. And now you can go to a local Planned Parenthood, and after a 10-minute interview, your child can be given puberty blockers. So what I'm curious about is, what is your opinion about why there has been such a pendulous swing from this version of transitioning that is very medically and psychologically based, and really based in some form of a therapeutic intervention, as opposed to, the 7-Eleven version where you can just dip in and get something and then get out?
I think there's been a few factors. I know that when I was at Cal, I came across a pamphlet that was, I believe it was through the gender center that was on campus that I got it from, that was pushing the idea even back then that perhaps someday we should have it set up so that all children get puberty blockers and have their puberty suppressed until they're old enough to decide what gender they want, and that we should just be doing it by default, even in kids who don't believe in that, because it's wrong to force someone to just go through the wrong puberty, right? And it's kids, but they had an idea that, like, well, kids might not necessarily know, and so we need to give them all more time, which is in conflict with the other thing that we're told, which is that gender identity forms by age 3 and is fixed across the lifespan. So you have this kind of split in people believe one thing or the other. If they try to believe both, it's because they haven't thought about it and tried to reconcile it yet.
Mm.
But I think that it was Obamacare that redefined these interventions as being akin to like if you don't give a phalloplasty to a person that wants to transition, that's the legal equivalent of not treating somebody because they're Black, even though it's obviously very, very different.
Yeah.
It's the idea that's the idea. And so and by analogy, also the idea that medical insurance has to cover, say, maternity care, and that not covering the care that women need is discrimination against women. So therefore, not covering the care that trans people need is discrimination against trans people. But it's so now we're in a situation where that's paid for by public and private health insurers, and so there's therefore a means and a market. So that's I think why you've seen this larger push to normalize it and to advertise it in schools even.
Would you opine that the DSM-5 is playing an active role in this as well? Because now we have the insurance companies involved, and they, the only way to get something covered is if it's listed in the DSM-5.
Right, and so now, and then the DSM-5 came out in 2013.
Yes.
So it's all in that period of years where this is we're transforming the way that this gender identity disorder stopped being seen as the pathology. And now the pathology is that, well, your gender identity doesn't match society's expectations, and that's what's causing the problem. It's not that you have a problem, it's that you just don't match society, which is kind of akin to suggesting that we should medically be treating skin color, because skin color might cause societal complications and unhappiness if we accept the premise that there's racism and that causes problems. But they don't want to do it for other things. This is this own special thing where we have to go in and fix it somehow.
Well, and they do that in Asia, where there are all these lightening creams, and it used to be that if your skin was tanned, that meant that you were a field worker. So people wanted to lighten their skin in Asia. So there is a medicalization of wanting to lighten the skin too, anal bleaching.
Yeah, we do have that out here. We have tanning beds. I have a joke satire called a dander dysphoria. Dander referring to skin and hair. And so if you don't like your hair or your skin, if you want to get a beard transplant, if you want to get your hairline reduced or get hair follicle transplants, or any number of things, you have dander dysphoria, and so those should be covered. So I say that I have different dander identities on different days. And so I need dander prosthetics, otherwise known as wigs, to express my dander identities, because I'm dander flux. And if you don't want my insurance company to pay for my dander identities, then you're a transphobe. You're a wigot. It's wigotry.
That's genius. I love it.
I'm wondering, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
When it will become more acceptable to have racial dysphoria. I know that's happened a couple of times where some English dude, I think, got an operation to make it look like he had occipital lobes to make him look Korean, because he.
Ollie London.
Yes. Oh, was that who that was?
Yeah, he's trans-Korean. He's now a detrans. He's gone back to white. But he had all these interventions to look like Jimin, which is like a specific Korean pop star. I think he's valid.
Your tax dollars.
Koreans owe you Asianness.
Your tax dollars paid for that.
And
I think he had to pay out of pocket because racial dysphoria is not covered yet.
Yeah,
which is oppression.
And there's cultural appropriation, but why isn't there not gender appropriation? Like, why aren't we talking about stuff like that? It's just so duplicitous, duplicitous. Yeah. That's the word I mean. Yeah, it's very, very hypocritical. But
and no one is wanting to look like B. Arthur or Jean Stapleton. Like it's this very hypersexualized, objectified version of the woman, which really makes which I found so fascinating that somehow feminists would sign off and co-sign on this and say, well, yeah, we want you to objectify women more, and we want you to get these pendulous breasts and and really make yourself look like a caricature of a woman. If someone wanted to look like Rue McClanahan or one of the Golden Girls, I could sign off on that. I'd be like, okay, this person really does want to look like a woman.
Now all drag queens look like divine. They don't even try to look like women. They try to look like a drag queen in a John Waters movie. It's very odd, very strange.
Yeah, and there's now as we get more into the I call it the Church of the non-binaries, or sometimes the non-binitarianism, because there's binitarianism as a sect of Christianity. So by analogy with that. And that's the group that thinks that you can have your gender realization at any age, and you can have gender identities that change, and you like it's less about female to male transition to the other sex, the other gender, as you're transitioning from female to not female, or male to not male, and whatever not male and not female like look like to you is fine. So if your version of not female has no nipples, go for it. Just remove those. They call them nip nops.
So, and have you heard that now there's an elf surgery where people are getting women are getting their ears cropped to look like elves?
I think I've seen those, but yeah. I mean, why not?
Yeah, why the fuck?
So do you think any of these folks, and I know that this is just an opinion, but do you think any of these people are happy?
I mean, it's hard to say, because in my opinion, as someone that once felt like this fit with me, I was very unhappy in those days, which is why doing things like wearing what amounted to a costume, having a reason to dress up and aim for a look and feel like I'd achieved it. Why playing pretend with my friends, all those things had were able to make me feel better, is because my default was that I didn't feel good. And they tell us that, like, well, people who are doing this feel so badly that if you misgender them or mispronoun them, or don't seem excited by their gender in some way, that they're at risk of ending their lives. Like that's a realistic outcome. And so I think that's why it especially is appealing to children and teenagers, because the angsty teenager is kind of a thing and they're already unhappy. So I feel like if you get to a place of genuine happiness, you don't need to do this anymore. You might still look like that because of permanent interventions you've undertaken, but it stops having the necessity.
So when you were in Berkeley and you were feeling depressed and unhappy, do you think do you feel like in retrospect you just sort of got swept up into that because it was convenient and you were in the middle of it and it just seemed like a good idea, or did something genuinely strike a chord with you as far as the gender dysphoria part?
Well, I think that personality wise, I often like surprise people for various reasons, and that at the same time I also have social skills difficulties that have gone much better over time, but especially in those days, my model of how other people saw me and reality didn't really line up. And so this was like a reason to spend a lot of time thinking about, like, why do people react the way they do, and if I change how I act this way, how do people respond that way? I think that it was also had a sense that it was freeing, whereas before I had this sense of burdensome social expectations that were tied to the fact that I was a woman, and this was like a permission to just be myself as much as I could in terms of my actions, but also to explore performance and to think of, it's interesting because there's an interesting tension between just being yourself and then also the fact that you're pretending to be something you're not.
Mhm.
So it's I do think both can kind of be true at the same time in terms of responding more based on your actual emotional opinion of the situation and what's been presented to you and what this person is to you, while also, you know, trying to play a role for the other person that might feel more comfortable to you. And I think that it was also that it was popular and I wanted to fit in with my friends.
Mhm.
And that I didn't really have a way to do that that wasn't predicated on a shared hobby or fandom. So before I was in that community, as an adolescent and older teenager, I was very into cosplay,
Mm.
anime, going to anime expos, dressing up for that reason. And and so having a friend group where we were all very interested in like one show or a couple shows, and
Mhm.
it's a way of getting around the fact that everyone in the group has social skills deficits, and we only want to talk about things that are interesting to us and that we know about, and we want to dominate the conversation, and we want to like be in a teacher student kind of position,
Mhm.
and we don't really know another way to be.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of a crutch.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And it seems like a way to, if somebody is having personal internal problems that they're having a hard time dealing with in any sort of reasonable way, because it could be, I would imagine it could be very emotional. Um, it's sometimes easier to foist the responsibility for your problems onto other people. So if you're
Mm,
walking around with perceptions, social perceptions, and you are tweaking it in a way that makes people react in a way that maybe is something that, you know, is not the reaction that you're aiming for, or, you know, it confuses people, then it's easy to blame them for their reaction as opposed to, you know, something that might have come from you internally. I don't know if that makes any sense.
like it's easy to attribute, like if you have a negative interaction, you attribute it to the fact that they don't like your gender.
Sure. Or they don't like how you're presenting, or how you know, whatever it is that whatever way you're defining yourself, they're not accepting you. And so that's their problem. It's like,
Yeah, yeah, it stops. It does relieve you a little bit of a sense of responsibility for how the interaction went,
yeah.
if you can decide that it has something to do with that. And I think the pronoun thing is kind of about that. So if someone's not respecting your respecting your pronouns by speaking differently because you told them to,
Mhm.
then you can make all these inferences about how they're a bad person, they don't care about you, and it kind of relieves you of relationship building, and perhaps taking responsibility for your own difficulties. Because you know, at the time I had I didn't think of myself as somebody that had a kind of an intrinsic social skills difficulty. I didn't at all.
Mhm.
And part of that is because like when I mean, I knew that I had a developmental issue. I had a diagnosis under DSM-4 that was later folded into autism in
Mhm.
the DSM-5 update, but this was before DSM-5 came out. And then I didn't get my like autism owl until like last year,
Mm.
basically
Mhm.
2022. It was after my trigonometry interview. Some people emailed me and they're like, well, you realize that your explanation is wrong. Is one of my videos, but like I had a very specific explanation that I had been given when I was 12 for why I wasn't autistic, that I didn't know was out of date. So,
Oh,
Mm.
but also that was more focused on the sensory issues, and I think I hadn't had enough therapy either to like grow past some of the causes of or contributing factors to this theory of mind
mhm.
issues. So I couldn't see them yet, and I couldn't acknowledge what I couldn't see. Really,
Right.
it's hard to acknowledge what you can't see.
Well, the phenomena that I have, uh, I've named this is the makes me feel culture. And I think that social media has really been the vehicle to bolster this,
Mm,
which is you're making me feel uncomfortable.
right,
So your feelings are really contingent on other people's behavior and other people's response to you, as opposed to taking ownership for
right.
the way that you feel. And I think that the language behind that is so disempowering that that has become a generational thing that's now happened, where you hear people saying, well, you're not using my pronouns and that's making me feel dot, dot, dot.
Right.
Do you think that language has now been hijacked by this?
Yeah, definitely. And as, when you give yourself kind of permission to hyper focus on how you feel, it does sort of relieve you of a sense of responsibility for self-regulating.
Mhm.
So you get so focused on how everything else is making you feel that you might forget that, like, okay, well, maybe my initial reaction maybe was an overreaction. Maybe I can self-soothe and self-regulate. And maybe even if somebody makes me feel unsafe, it doesn't mean that they are unsafe. And but there's like a merger of those two things. So which means that if you take for granted that someone who makes you feel unsafe is unsafe, that's going to make you feel more unsafe when you realize you feel unsafe. And so if you don't have insight into the fact that maybe you have an anxiety disorder, it's very easy to build a whole like castle fortress of solitude there, of avoiding anything that might slightly trigger it, and deciding that no, it's everybody else that's bad. There's a meme that's like, it is, if my mind and my body are in conflict, is my mind ill? Like, no, it's my body that's wrong.
Well, I think one of the most empowering things that I recognized just in my own process was feelings are not facts.
Mm,
So just because you feel something, they may be real to you, but that doesn't mean that the whole world is perceiving the world the way that you are. So I think that's the disconnect that we're seeing now, is that there's just um, this whole mythos that has been developed and grown around this idea that if I feel something because it's real for me, that means that the world has to bolster and reinforce that.
yeah. So if you have difficulty with theory of mind, I think that a lot of people that they get told that, or who take on the label of autism, they don't really want to grapple with the implications of it. If you have a theory of mind deficit, that includes your own mind. It means you have an impairment in even seeing your own mind, and therefore in your own biases and tendencies. And so your model of like why you're doing what you're doing is more likely to be wrong.
Mm.
You need to be talking about this with somebody that doesn't have that impairment, who's verified through a process of education and licensure to either not have that impairment or to have overcome it through that process, to have been vetted in some way,
Mm.
and to be able to help you work on this. So if I hadn't overcome mine, for instance, I don't think they would have let me into the field, and they made that very clear. They're like, you're thinking about this is wrong. Oh, but I'm so grateful for my school. They really, my graduate school, they did a great job helping me see myself.
So how
Cool.
did you veer into a different direction? What happened that woke you up? Was it your girlfriend's surgery? Was it your own? What did you have some kind of an epiphany where you were like, I'm in a fucking cult? Like how did you snap
Kinda,
out of
yeah.
it?
It was seeing the harm that was being done. Have After seeing it for a period of years, it was there. Another instance, there was one of the people in my social group was making social media posts uh, criticizing specific research study authors, because these authors were trying to recruit men who they said were trying to recruit cis men and trans women specifically for a trial for PrEP, the HIV prevention drug.
Mhm.
And so they wanted men who were in relationships with men, male humans, to see how readily this drug prevented HIV transmission at whatever dose they were getting. And she wanted to be in the study because she's a man. She's on testosterone. She's a man. And they were like, no. She's like, I'm more of a man than a trans woman.
What?
And I was like, what?
Wow.
What does that mean? I'm not even sure what that means.
So she was like, "They're these transphobes. They're and just trying to cancel these researchers just because they understand that men aren't women." And so I always thought that, like, okay, only women can be trans men. Like, you're not actually escaping your sex category. I never thought I was like actually outside of my sex category. I think that makes me a bit different and that was kind of a realization that some of them actually thought we were literally becoming men by looking like them.
Yeah.
And I was like, no. And so it just kind of was a moment of realizing that a lot of these people were very, very detached from reality. And that was a problem, because and then also one of them also started identifying as not just as a trans man, but as a gay man specifically. And this was someone I knew to be a lesbian, and she was actively in a relationship with another female at the time, and they were identifying as gay men and not having any qualifier to that. And I just thought I was just offended by that, because I was just like, you're not, though, but you're not. So it's just that was kind of like realizing from trying to talk about it a little bit, and the pushback I got, like, okay, my options are either to let go of my sense of reality, which I wasn't willing to do. I've always been a very materialist kind of person, and very, very,
Pragmatic.
Yeah, pragmatic. Or, I can try to change them, and I'm not going to be able to change them, obviously, because they're checked out. They're acting religious. I don't want to be in a religion. I didn't realize I'd accidentally joined a religion. Like, so I think I'm just gonna pull back and just gradually, I was in graduate school by that point. I was like, maybe I need to be investing in relationships with people who are outside of this faith community. And otherwise I knew I was going to completely lose those relationships. And well, I did completely lose them in the end.
They turned on you.
They kind of like, it was a mix of like turning on me and then just kind of like, so like when I was in graduate school, I wanted to not cut my hair till after I graduated, because that's something that my stepdad had done when he was in graduate school. And so I just kind of wanted to do that like him. And then also I just kind of wanted to stop spending so much time trying to dress in such a way that I look like a man. I felt like that was taking up too much of my attention, and also was possibly, I just didn't want to bring that into a clinical program. I just wanted to just be predictable, because it wasn't about me in that room. And so but I would start, like, I'd go to school and I'd come back and I would see them, and I just realized that I would say things that were not that different from what I had said before, and I would get re-educated in a way that I hadn't before. And I was like, why are you talking to me like I'm new to this, or that I don't know the philosophy? Like, I thought that, like, I'm the one that brought you into this. And then it just occurred to me, like, oh, it's because I don't look trans. I'm not wearing it would be like showing up at mosque without a hijab on.
Yeah.
They would wonder. Like, it doesn't matter what you and they have done before. You have to actually look like you belong. And I didn't look like I belonged anymore. And that kind of made me feel like, oh, it's not that we all have some special insight into how people really are. It's just another social subculture. It's based on how you look. And I didn't want to assign that a higher level of importance than it should be given. Whereas before I saw it as like, we're basically like, we're part of the elect. It's a sort of Calvinist idea. So these people, these other relationships are actually more important than relationships with people who are outside of this special group. And so it was just a paradigm shift of like, oh, this is just a club. It's a club. We have a costume. We have a uniform that we wear. And if you don't wear it, then they see you differently.
Now, did you pass as a man when you
never? No, not at all.
Because you have such a beautiful, like, Grecian face. I can't imagine anyone looking at you and saying, "Hey, feller."
Hey, dude.
I think I passed twice. One time I was on a moving bike, and then they self-corrected like quickly. And then the second time it was from behind in a bathroom, and the woman was like, are you supposed to be in here? And I was like, I turned around. She's like, oh. So no, I really, and it's like, you can even see, like, I'm really curvy too. Like, it doesn't work.
Were you doing the binding of the chest and that whole thing? Like, were you like,
Well,
how
yeah.
far were you taking it?
I had a binder. I still have the binder. It's kind of just like a souvenir at this point. I posted a picture of it to Twitter, I think last week, because I came across a picture where you can see that you have your image in your head of, you're going to put the binder on, it's just going to be flat, and then the reality of, like, no, it just looks like a very poorly fitting bra. And for some reason, I also thought, well, if I'll just put them up here and then it'll hold it up. So, like, I would have like pecs that would come out, like, no.
Like an extreme tube top.
Yeah, and then I would need to wear really baggy shorts, really low on my hips, for it to not look just like normal. And then the binder, and then very loose shirts with like a shirt over it. And then I'm also like 5'5" on a good day, like with lifts in my shoes and thick socks. So I don't look like a male. I look very clearly like a female. But when you have also like a sensory development delay, it can be hard for you to have a realistic idea of how you look to other people, and also to understand that, like, other people can see can reconcile your absolute size, as well as, you have this idea in your head of how you look, and then you don't necessarily think about the fact that, like, well, you're the size of a female.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change. It's like, well, some men are short. It's like, yeah, but they don't have tiny little shoulders. Like, I'm basically like, I could give a mouse a run for its money getting under doors. Like, it's just ridiculous.
So what, coming to these realizations was a process in and of itself, but what was the thing that pushed you to want to go public with your opinions, which is a little more, it takes a little more guts to not just only resist that in the first place and risk losing all these friendships, but to be outspoken about it and say, I'm going to speak up and say exactly what I want, exactly what I feel about this.
Well, what pushed me to start doing that was, it was kind of not planned. I was only on Facebook from 2005 to 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And then near the end of 2020, I downloaded TikTok, or I call it the Cursed Clock app. I messed that up a little bit. Cursed Clock app.
Mm-hmm.
And I started just kind of making videos. It was the first time I was like, oh, wow, it's not just like a written status update. People are posting videos where they, like, you can I was just amazed at how much more you get out of watching a video of somebody expressing their opinion than reading the same thing. I felt much closer to the people in the videos. Parasocial stuff. I was very, very new to that whole situation. Made a couple friends just making silly videos. I was making videos. I think I was talking about just kind of the broad. A friend of mine had just passed away from cancer, and so the people around me, I realized also, like, they didn't have the same model of the system of the human body that I did,
mm-hmm.
and that had been very relevant very recently. And so I wanted to just kind of share that knowledge. I felt like that's something I could do, is make little videos talking about, like, what are the kidneys? Like, what do they do? Why is it that a disease like COVID that will just, like, make your lungs not work? Why is that putting people in kidney failure? Because I think that's not obvious to a lot of people. And so it's these videos like that. And so and then I just kind of started making videos also about linguistics, and I made a reference to categories and spectrums being important to understand for understanding how words work and how language works. And someone asked me for an example of the distinction there. And so the example I chose was that, well, like, women and men have different heart attack symptoms, and the difference is not due to any one factor, it's due to many different factors. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, women and men need to be seen as categorically distinct for that medical knowledge to survive and to make sense. Whereas what I saw from what was happening with LGBT, where it was becoming, I think, forget who I heard it from first, but the Wi-Fi password community, the 2S LGBTQIA plus plus, that was an attempt to represent the entire community in the word that represented the community.
Yes.
Mhm.
By continuously subdividing and solving Zeno's paradox by like, well, what if we only went halfway this time? We, and that just wouldn't work. And so that the solution was to integrate and not keep subdividing infinitely.
Mm.
That's just not how words work. So
Mhm.
you need to understand that there's a spectrum that's contained within this word of different things. But you can have them all be in the same category, even though there's other differences within a category. So I got called turf and sissy immediately by like 1,000 kids. Like it just went super viral because TikTok is like that, and that was most of the comments. I was just like, you could just scroll and just turf, sissy, sissy.
I don't understand the sissy part.
Like,
Cisgender.
yeah, they'll call you sissy, which makes me think that they started at sissy and worked backwards to get sis. But
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah, so that's just an insult they use. And so I had like not really heard the word turf before,
Mhm.
or certainly had not been called it. And so I was just like, and I was being called it because I said men and women had different heart attack symptoms, and that's actually really important for women to know, especially. I mean, everyone should know what their heart attack symptom is that's based on their sex.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was just like, this is really dangerous. And so I kind of made a video where I just like complained about that and gave like a little speech where I mentioned my background and the fact that I used to identify as trans and now I don't anymore. And I'm gonna keep saying true medical facts, even if people don't like it. I had a few thousand followers at that point for my linguistics videos, and so that got downloaded and put on Twitter and went around and got a bunch of attention from the gender critical community and the detrans community, which I didn't know those existed.
Mm.
There was like already other people working on this project of addressing this problem of trying to erase the understanding that's very medically relevant that men and women are different. And so yeah, so I just kind of started looking on TikTok, and it was kind of like an ethnography gold mine too, because all these people were putting up their own, like here's the surgery and here's the aftermath. And so I started also making videos both about the language aspect and then about why there's why there's no singular they and why there's other people's needs and rights to consider when talking about like changing what's expected as far as pronouns go, and whether it's reasonable to expect certain people to be able to memorize an infinite number of pronouns that have no visual referent and are against the rules of their own language.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that something we have a right to be expecting people to do?
Mhm.
And also saying that like it's not always like it may not always be a mental illness to identify this way or representative of that, but where it's not that, it's a religion. And yeah, and then eventually I made the leap to YouTube and started making longer form content and getting in touch with people. So I've gone around to a few conferences in the last couple of years, and that's been really fun too.
Cool.
I think one of the editors of American Mind saw my video about gender atheism, how I just don't believe in gender identity, and asked me to write that as an article. And so I started getting articles published there, and it's just been really, really nice to be able to dust off the gender and women's studies degree and actually use it.
Yeah, for good. Cool. That's incredible. And your first channel got, of course, taken off, right?
Yeah, the TikTok channel nearly got to 10,000 and then got banned, and that's happened a couple times since too. YouTube, I got to about 15,000 and then got banned in the midst of a bunch of gender criticals trying to cancel me, like brand name ones that are still like generally respected. A lot of people don't know that they did this, but it was a whole thing. Someone commissioned a rap about me. That was a yeah.
A rap?
Yeah, they like paid. It's like a well produced rap. It's like Exulansic, spreading bigotry and lies.
Oh my God!
Wow.
You have to send me a link to that.
Huh? Yeah. Okay, I will.
Please do.
It's just funny. But yeah, it's been a whole thing. I've of course had the Jordan Peterson situation where people have tried to like figure out where I work or otherwise cause problems for me there. Um, he if you're not familiar, he's dealing with some internet complaints from some foreign country
Yes.
because they're mad about how he talked in a podcast, and it's about chilling our sense that we can just speak freely when we're in different places. So it's like even now I'm like I don't know how much to say about this. Just the thought of it, scary.
Yeah. You,
So, where do you see this all headed? Because it seems like we are kind of in the thick of it right now. I'm in the academic world. My area of research, I'm studying psychology, and I am a McNair scholar. I did a research project this summer that I'm still working on sex dolls and on incels, and how there is a real crisis around the world of people that are not having relationships with each other, that they are pivoting to having relationships with avatars. They're pivoting to having relationships with dolls.
Mm,
And in my uh, symposium that I did, that I was a part of, someone in the audience who identifies as a trans woman asked me a question and said, "Why are you focused on cisgender men? Why is your study focused on cisgender men? Don't women buy sex dolls?" And my response was, "Women go to brunch.
mm,
Women have relationships with each other, and so the need for they have a different emotional terrain that they navigate with each other, where men tend to be more isolated. So the percentage of women going out and purchasing a sex doll is almost nil compared to how many men are going out and purchasing them." So
mm,
of course the reaction to my statement was that this person requested that there be a trans sensitivity training that was done for McNair scholars, because I was um, focusing on men and men bad, women good. I don't really
mm,
understand the whole mindset behind that. I'm actually in a women's studies class right now that is studying pre-modern European women. It's called From Goddesses to Witches, and I'm
mm.
absolutely fascinated by this class. But I do see this, like I am embedded right now in the thick of this gender ideology. Where do you see it headed? Like what is going to have to happen in order for people to shift away from this? Will there be another trend? Like what do you think it is?
I think that what's going to have to happen, a couple things that, well, ultimately the knowledge of the harms of these interventions needs to perfuse the culture. People need to have the same association with these interventions as they do with lobotomy.
Yes.
They need to hear phalloplasty and think fistula, and that might not happen for a while. They also need to know that what's being done to children, because there's a lot of propaganda where you'll be talking to someone and they'll say, well, no children are getting surgeries. And then you can list off several of like famous people who are like, well, this person is suing Kaiser because she had a mastectomy at 13. So did that not happen? You think the whole thing is a lie? I feel like they would have thrown the case out if she had like not had that happen. And then they'll come back with some version of well, it is happening, but it's good that it's happening in some way. So I think that it's also going to need to be revealed how incompetent and exploitive and manipulative the doctors that are doing this are. So in a lot of my videos, I talk about how it's good doctors don't want to cut if there's not a reason to cut.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to put somebody through something horrible. If there's another way, like they and that in my opinion, if you certain things, wanting them should be a sign that you don't understand them well enough to get them, to consent to getting them. You're not in a place where you either are not informed or are not mentally well enough to agree that that's a good idea. You usually a combination. And so I think the only way that's going to happen is with litigation, having these doctors testify in depositions and sometimes in court, where their lack of understanding can be revealed, and or their lack of informing the patient of what they did understand can be shown, or some other negative motivation. Like I have a video of Dr. Crane from the Crane Center, a transgender thing. It was pinned on my Twitter for a long time, where somebody asks, will my breasts grow back? And his initial answer is no. And then he says, well, the only time I've seen breasts grow back is if the patient gains 30 or 40 pounds. So it's just like, they know that they're manipulating kids. And they also know that a lot of these kids actually have eating disorders. And that's why they want to take a drug that changes their body fat distribution. Like, that's the real reason. One of the people in the orbit that time had a known history of anorexia, like that she was open about. And so like, there's a reason they want to remove fat all at once. They want to have these things removed. And it's not necessarily because they want to be a man, but they understand that's the means to the end. There's the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia put out if I'm not mistaken, but I called it the Chop Shop, that episode. So I think it was them. They also infamously were the people that treated Casey Miller, who's a detransitioner that went kind of viral last fall, about her hair. But they had a training video that featured a young man who was starving himself and fainting as a result. And it showed the hospital staff being like, "Oh, is it's because you want to be more feminine? That's why you want to be thinner? That makes sense." And then the focus shifts to how the mom is bad for not affirming and not going along with the gender procedures. So, there's a lot of money to be made in this.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, these clinics are popping up all over the United States. It's really insane. What I'm so curious about is the process, as we were discussing earlier, the process that you used to have to go through compared to what it is now. They're not showing any of these children a surgery. They're not telling them you will never have an orgasm. They're not talking about bone loss and osteoporosis and the fact
Everything's reversible.
that it is so that I think if you said, okay, you want to have this surgery, great. But this is what you're going to have to do first. First, you're going to have to watch one of these surgeries. And you're going to have to understand for the rest of your life, you will be on pharmaceuticals first. Secondly, you will have to have repeated surgeries over the course of your life. You don't get one set of breasts and then that's it. You're good. You're done. People that get breast implants have to have multiple surgeries throughout their lives because the breast implant leaks, because it moves, it shifts. That there's all types of consequences to having these surgeries. So I think that is something that has to be, when Chris and I were talking about this interview, he was saying, I want to talk about the sociological aspect. I don't necessarily want to focus on the medical aspect. And I said, the medical aspect is the part that people need to hear. They need to see this surgery and the side effects of these surgeries, the infection. They need to see someone that's had a penis formed out of their body that is not able to urinate properly.
Yeah, and that's why I've wanted to collect these stories and react to them and centralize them, so that people could really see what you might be signing up for if you agree to let a doctor take the skin of your arm and roll it up like a fruit roll up and stitch it together, and then stitch it to your crotch and try to pee through it and expect nothing bad to happen from that nonsense.
And you'll never have an erection. You'll never
And
have
they have two options there. There's
Yep.
the water balloon version,
right.
and then there's the futon frame version where they actually like click it into place.
So romantic.
I had a video where the girlfriend of the trans man is talking about it, and she's like, well, it's you kind of like take this like towel, and it's like it goes up like, like it's obvious that she's not that into it.
Oh God.
It's a consolation prize.
God. Oh my God. That's just horrifying.
It is. Yeah, I can imagine going through that whole process and coming to the realization that you made a huge mistake and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. That's got to be a horrible, existentially horrifying place to be.
Yeah. And we're talking about people who are already at risk of self-harm.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're going to put them in a position where they're going to need serious care forever, where they started from when they were like too young to really understand, like so young that we didn't trust them to drive.
Mhm.
We certainly didn't trust them to drink.
Yeah.
And we're going to set them up for this. Jazz Jennings was only 17 when he had the vaginoplasty, and according to his mom, like she had to dog him in order to keep him dilating. Like that's just been a
I mean,
regular
oh
thing.
my
It's like
God.
he wasn't even, mature. Maybe we should have gotten him a puppy first to see if he was mature enough to take care of a vaginoplasty.
My God. What are your
Hello
thoughts?
there.
Well, hello, little missy.
I'm so happy that this finally happened. We had a couple of clunky weeks where we weren't able to do it when we said we were going to do it.
Mhm.
And I was really, really excited for this interview. And I'm so glad we were able to do it tonight.
Me too, definitely. I've been, as I do, dipping into her videos and interviews with her and stuff like that. And I was really excited because I mean, I think particularly when you're talking about this subject, which in many contexts is what I meant to say, is very charged for a lot of people. So if you're going to speak about it, especially in a critical manner, it really helps to be highly articulate, which she is definitely highly articulate and knows her shit in so many different ways as far as um, all of the complications that can happen medically, psychologically, just so many different contextual things in this milieu that are important to really construct a full picture of this whole deal because it is very complex and it's easy to just kind of look at it in a couple of ways and pick out a couple of items and go, yeah, I have a problem with that and that. But when you see all of them together, there's so much more to it than I even thought of, and I've done a lot of thinking about this subject. So yeah, her viewpoint is definitely welcome and needed.
I think that the aspect of being on the spectrum and autism and that being a potential correlate is really an interesting dynamic of this. And, the fact that young women primarily have been misdiagnosed when it comes to being on the autistic spectrum, that I think it's important to understand that part of the octopus of this agenda is the medicalization of um, psychopathologies and the medicalization of certain mental health issues that people have or could potentially have that have gone undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. So I think that that is a really interesting um, dynamic here is that she is very forthcoming about discussing her own diagnosis and her own issues that she has experienced. But these through lines of these all of these issues are so fascinating to me, like the cosplay anime. Like you could almost do like a trans timeline, and you could kind of tick like lines along that timeline of when one thing is going to happen that then it's going to lead to this other thing.
Mhm.
And so to hear her journey and kind of see that she has some of those ticks on that line, or it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and what I was saying earlier about these were pioneers, her friends that we were talking about. I meant in the particular context that they were in. Uh, sure, this has happened for decades, I'm sure centuries, but I'm talking about in a more of a surgical context. And it seems like, at least in the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, you would see these news stories or documentaries or whatever about a man who would get a sex change operation, but he was usually like in his 40s, or,
Hmm.
you know, not hardly any young people whatsoever, to my knowledge, at least. Uh, but it wasn't until the 2000s, to my knowledge, more like the 2015, something like that, where it really became prevalent, maybe even a little later than that, really became prevalent, uh, to that this would happen younger and younger to children, but at the very least, college age kids, which is what she said. This happened at the UC Berkeley, right?
In 2009.
2009. So what I mean is that that wasn't a thing so much then. Not
Well,
that it didn't happen at all, but it wasn't like a movement like it is now.
I think what was going on, and you and I have talked about this a lot. We've talked with other guests about this, that in the era that you and I grew up in, there was still, especially in the Midwest, there were gay people that were extremely closeted uh, amongst like adults, and there were gay kids that were closeted, but there weren't children who were necessarily trans identifying at that period. You had girls that dressed like boys that were called tomboys. You had boys that were effeminate that they were teased, and disparaging terms were used
Sissies,
for them:
limp
fat,
wrists. Yeah,
faggot, sissy, queer, all of these terms were used, but these boys weren't dressing like girls and identifying as girls.
exactly.
So, and in that era, it was, oh, you're gay or you're a tomboy as a girl. And then in kind of the mid 80s, it really became about this kind of the gender fluidity that was happening was girls wearing men's clothes that they got at the flea market, or they got at the secondhand store, and boys started to wear skirts and eye makeup, and so there were gender fluid behaviors, but no one was saying, no, I'm really a woman.
Mhm.
Like they weren't really like cross identifying. So I think that there was a trend that was happening in that period, but it wasn't being um, calcified in the medical community.
Definitely not in the medical community for sure. Um, Yeah, and there was a lot, glam metal, or not glam metal, but glam rock in the 70s. Like, it was New York Dolls. Like, they're just, I was, and then women thought that they were very, very sexy. These guys who would wear platform shoes and makeup and women's clothes and tiaras and scarves and stuff like that. But they didn't call themselves women. Like, they were just playing around. They were just being gender non-conforming, or whatever the terminology would be. So there was a leap where all of a sudden, and then maybe I don't know, a cynical part of me wants to say that it's the symptom of a culture that is running out of real, or at least an aspect of it is running out of real things to worry about. Like, we're not a war torn country. We, you know, we're probably in many ways the most wealthy nation, you know, currently. So it seems like when you run out of real things to be concerned about, you can sit around and luxuriously daydream about, I don't really feel like the gender that I was born with. Like, that's just not a. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think the part of the octopus, the tentacles of the octopus, is social media,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
the where the shift has happened is we have more access to each other around the world than we ever have. So if you're not getting attention at your high school, if you're not getting attention from your parents, if you go on social media and you see someone getting attention for a specific behavior, you may want to emulate that behavior, because not necessarily because you align yourself with that behavior, but you align yourself for the need for that attention. And so I think that is, from a foundational perspective, that's where all this started. I think had we had social media in the 80s when we were growing up, there may have been more of a phenomenon of this, because we would have been seeing people dressed up like David Bowie, people dressed up like New York Dolls. There was Tim Curry in Rocky Horror Picture Show. So there was the transvestite aspect of fashion and of art, and that was happening. But I think it was so much more limited in the access that we had. So we weren't looking at someone that was doing this, you know, across the pond and going, "Oh, well, I need to do exactly what that person's doing," because we just didn't have the same degree of connection. So I
Well,
think that had a big that has plays a big part in it.
connection in combination with hyper fragmentation. It seems like the more that we became steeped in the internet in a forum where we could all exchange ideas, you know, some people use that to unite and meet people and then take it into the real world and do things, whatever, various things. But many people use that to um, really firmly lodge themselves inside of echo chambers. So I think that's when a lot of fragmentation started happening. And this seems to be a symptom of a combination of lots of things: high fragmentation, um, the sort of the social acceptance of mental illness in any form whatsoever, for the most part, except maybe being a serial killer. Um,
Well, that's socially acceptable too.
well, they're kind of mythic heroes,
Yeah.
the anti hero. Um, and uh you know uh also you have a lot of disenfranchised kids who have parents who are caught up in stupid bullshit and don't have time to pay attention to them or talk to them or have any kind of meaningful interaction with them, so they're just kind of free floating, and they're depressed, and maybe they're on pharmaceuticals because of ADHD or whatever the fuck.
Right.
And then, so it's this combination, this soup of all these different things that just kind of, left leaves these people feeling sort of anchorless. So
Right.
they have no grounding.
But we had all of that. We had that exact same formula. That exact same formula happened in the generation before us, in the generation before that generation. So we had, the rebel without a cause with James Dean, and he was the disenfranchised kid. And then we had the 70s rebellion that was happening. Then we had the 80s rebellion. The difference is, so, like, when Madonna came out, then suddenly you have 10-year-olds wearing bras and, eye makeup, because of, so the what we have called culture has been a form of mesmerism or hypnotism. And again, it's to see how many people adopt this specific style of dress. Okay, because we're going to sell records, we're going to sell lace and whatever the fuck else we're selling, lace gloves or whatever, or hairspray. And so we throw these things out and see how much of that sticks. I think the difference is that, yeah, people were getting boob jobs to look like Pamela Anderson in the 90s, but boob jobs were expensive and you had to get, and they weren't covered by insurance. And so when the DSM 5 came around and it changed the criteria for gender dysphoria, and now you can code for that for insurance, I think that was a huge shift.
That too.
I think that all of these things are interrelated. So we can't just point to one aspect.
Yeah. But the thing that was lacking in all those previous decades that you were talking about is hyperfragmentation, which is what we have now. I mean, there was maybe minor fragmentation going on, but maybe men and women and, black and white to some extent. But the hyperfragmentation I'm talking about is, subdividing to an insane nth degree. Like there's so many different subdivisions and categories and
Right.
subcultures and like more than ever before. So I think it makes it easier to cling to one group, point to all the other ones as the outliers or as the bad guys or whatever the fuck, the oppressors or whatever. So without that cohesive social glue, like that just leaves a lot of free floating sponges for whatever the fuck comes along if they have no grounding or self-reflection or anything more to grasp on.
I think the fragmentation's always been there. You've always had the outlier, you've always had the freak, you've always had the nerd, you've always had the preppy, you've always had these categories, you've always had the separation and the bifurcation from adults and kids, and adults aren't cool and kids are cool but they're awkward. There's that has always, I mean, historically, we've always had this type of a push and pull. Again, you add these other elements into it. You add the mind control element of social media. You add the device into it. You have, these other the technology that's come in to these things. I think that those are the things that have made this stuff different, because people have always said, my parents didn't understand me. My parents don't talk to me. That, there's always been drug addiction. There's always been alcoholism. So none of these aspects are new. I think the difference is now we're looking for attention on this device. And so the way we fragment ourselves is to attempt to get more attention from these other sources.
True. Yeah, I'm just going to keep repeating myself.
Yeah.
Hyper fragmentation.
I think there's always been hyper fragmentation.
I don't think so.
I think
really
there's
don't think
more
so.
people on the earth now. I think that we have more of a way to feel isolated than we ever have.
Just think about it. If you want to talk about media, and I want to bring this to a close first because the kids are home, but when you think, if you're talking about media and social engineering, what were there, fucking 5 TV channels? And all the music that you had besides going to a record store was all the stuff that was on the radio. Now you have an endless amount of things to watch, things to listen to. Like there's just so much more. There's so many places, so many more tributaries in the labyrinth where people can get lost in than there ever were before. I believe that's what I believe. I believe that plays a big role in all of this. And not to mention, now that I think because of all of these different forms of media in all of its different manifestations, they've gotten a lot better at utilizing that in a controlling way. So
Totally.
it's much more manipulative than it was when I was watching sitcoms at night with my parents on a Tuesday. Like I didn't feel manipulated then. Like it didn't feel like an onslaught of some propaganda that there. But I was young. I had a different mindset than I do now.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, we could go on all night.
We could go
so
on
we
all
have
night.
To,
Yeah,
we
this
have
is
to call it at some point.
This is
'cause
an
we
ongoing
we could keep going.
conversation.
Yeah, lifetime conversation on lifetime.
On lifetime. Okay. Thank you all so much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this as much as we did and got something positive. And hopefully you go check out Exulansic's content. She's got great stuff.
Yeah,
And
she's
it's
cool.
hilarious too.
She's cool.
Yes,
Yeah,
very cool.
I liked her a lot. I really enjoyed her company.
For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. We have to have her on again.
We do. She's definitely someone that I feel like if we lived in the same town, we would be friends and we could hang out with.
Frenzies.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to contact us, the Melt Podcast at protonmail.com or
hunter-muse at protonmail.com.
And you can always go to themeltpodcast.net and you could find every little single thing you want to find out about where we're at on the interwebs. And you can get all of our episodes there. So thank you all so much for listening. Much love. And until next time.
Yeah.